Since the very beginning, Family Guy has always been about taking classic sitcom tropes and turning them on their heads. Case in point, what happens when you take the family pet from virtually every sitcom ever and then just decide to make him indistinguishable from any other human character? Apparently you get Brian Griffin. And since employing this trick to Family Guy, creator Seth MacFarlane has done this a few more times, incorporating fully sentient animals into the communities of Family Guy, American Dad, and The Cleveland Show. But what's the in-universe explanation for this? There are countless pieces of evidence that show that not all animals are created equal. Dogs like Brian aren't just normal dogs. Brian's only one of a handful of animals we've seen in Family Guy that have been burdened with humanity. And this has, of course, made people wonder, what's so special about Brian or others like him? His qualities are basically human, apart from the fact that, he's a dog. And this has gotten people to wonder the obvious logical explanation for this. Were the sentient animals in Family Guy and other shows once human? And is there some sort of ongoing experimentation with inserting human consciousness into animals? Yes, I know, I'm aware of how crazy that sounds, but here's the thing we have to keep in mind. This theory actually extends way further than Family Guy itself. It encompasses all of Seth MacFarlane's shows, except Cosmos, and The Winner, and probably Orville, since it doesn't exist yet. This theory encompasses the three main shows people associate with Seth MacFarlane, that being Family Guy, American Dad, and The Cleveland Show, which I guess from now on we're just going to call the MacFarlane-verse. While these shows have some pretty obvious similarities to them thanks to their creator, we thankfully don't have to go digging for little subtle clues to show how they're all connected. First of all, The Cleveland Show was a direct spin-off of Family Guy, which was joked about pretty frequently on both shows before The Cleveland Show's cancellation. And secondly, all three shows have had crossovers with each other in the past. Arguably the most apparent crossover was The Night of the Hurricane block, which aired on Fox on October 2nd, 2011, wherein all three shows had to endure the same hurricane, with the block ending in Stan, Peter, and Cleveland engaging in a standoff. So at this point we've established that all of these shows take place in the same universe. So now let's talk about the main theory that got this going. In American Dad, it's common knowledge that the Smith's fish Klaus actually has a reason for displaying human-like behavior. This is because he was originally an East German Olympic ski jumper who had his brainwaves switched with those of a goldfish's by the CIA to prevent him from winning the gold medal. Makes sense to me. This situation with Klaus, though, sets a precedent for all other shows in the MacFarlane-verse. Here we have a confirmed canon explanation as to why Klaus has human-like qualities. So who's to say that this isn't the case for shows like Family Guy or The Cleveland Show? This theory then goes on to say that this practice is so commonplace that the government has actually succeeded in making the public believe that certain animals just happen to be sentient sometimes. That way, no one will bat an eye if we see, say, Tim the Bear from The Cleveland Show walking some non-sentient dog, whose name I can't be bothered to come up with right now. So the question now, of course, is why? If we're going down this American Dad CIA experimentation route, why is the CIA so determined to swap brainwaves with certain people? What's the endgame? Is there one? Well, some versions of the theory suggest that the government in the MacFarlane-verse is determined to silence people who could pose as a threat to their country. In Brian's case, because he's a hardcore loudmouthed liberal, and in Klaus's because of his home country's tension with the States. Also because the 1986 Olympics were serious business. Another thing to keep in mind about MacFarlane's shows is that they frequently take something from our own world and then distort it to the millionth degree for the sake of some dark comedy. We know that many corporations and institutions test on animals, so could this be some sort of jab at that thinking by applying humans to the very same sort of testing? It's clear in the MacFarlane-verse that the CIA runs on some pretty twisted logic, so this makes the whole theory kinda believable. Is there anything else in these shows that might make us question this? Looking at this theory a little closer, we're going to focus on Brian and Klaus for the most part, since they're the characters we know the most about when it comes to sentient animals in the MacFarlane-verse, so they're gonna act as ambassadors to most of these characters. Before we start though, I find it difficult to examine the canon of Seth MacFarlane's shows, because it's so hard to nail down what the canon actually is. Despite the status quo of Family Guy changing a lot in the last 10 years and way more than a lot of other animated shows, a lot of the humor stems from just how inconsistent everything is. How many times has Peter died before in various gruesome ways in cutaways or non sequiturs? Taking everything at face value would mean that Peter and most of these other characters are stuck in some infinite time loop, causing them to die infinitely, like Kenny on South Park. I wonder if there's somewhere on the internet you could find out more about that theory when you're done with this video. But unlike South Park, the jumbled continuity of Family Guy doesn't seem to be leading to anything bigger. And these jokes are meant to be taken as just that. Just jokes. So with this rather large asterisk on this theory, let's take a closer look. First off, if the government is trying to silence dissenters, what about the Family Guy episode Excellence in Broadcasting, when Brian becomes a Republican? Granted, it wasn't for very long, but if he changed his political stance, you'd think the government would have taken some sort of notice. What about all the other people in the show who are actual threats to the country, as opposed to just vaguely troubling? If Brian was subjected to this experimentation, it's worth questioning, since neither he nor Klaus are actual threats. They're just victims of that aforementioned twisted logic. And if Brian's brainwaves have been swapped because he's a hardcore liberal, why hasn't Stan's daughter Haley gone through the same treatment? And for that matter, what about Tim's entire family on the Cleveland show? There isn't much to go on there that would suggest that they're enemies of the state, and there are lots of other one-off animal characters that we can't really be sure of. Also, if this is some sort of initiative to keep people silent, shouldn't there also be some sort of effort to relocate them from densely populated areas where they could still carry influence? Brian, despite being a dog, has accomplished tons in his life. He's led movements before, he's been a published author multiple times. It doesn't seem like there's any thought police to keep him in control. And if the MacFarlane-verse is home to this totalitarian government that we're being led to believe, shouldn't they have some sort of effort in place to keep that kind of stuff from happening? Another big thing to consider is that the MacFarlane-verse, just like another show that we covered recently, is home to a vast multiverse. And in the episode Road to the Multiverse, we see, among other universes, one where the traditional roles of dogs and humans are swapped. We're not going to get too into the whole multiverse thing again, but if this is the case, it's equally possible that MacFarlane's shows just primarily take place in a universe where walking, talking animals are just a thing that happens sometimes. But even if you think this theory is still 100% plausible up until this point, there's one big thing that still causes problems. Memories. Keeping Brian and Klaus in mind, there's one massive difference between the two. That being that Klaus has retained his memories as a human, and Brian, as far as we know, has no such memories. He instead remembers himself as a puppy and has very strong memories toward his mother, who is a dog. And we saw this way back in Road to Rhode Island. Fun fact, that episode premiered over 16 years ago. Some variations of this theory state that when the swap occurs, the animal brain used is very young, so it can't retain past human memories. This would explain why Brian has the mentality of adult despite us having seen him as a puppy before. Since his brainwaves were swapped with those of a puppy whose brain was underdeveloped, he maintained his same mannerisms but forgot his previous life, which would explain why he drives, why he dates women, and why he's a massive alcoholic. But even if we put this argument into place, it doesn't explain Klaus, as his memories are still intact. The problem is the same, it's just reversed. This inevitable inconsistency between the two makes it more possible that Klaus's situation is more of an isolated incident. Finally, from the creative perspective, it's pretty clear that the whole government conspiracy thing wasn't the intention from the very beginning. I mean, other than Klaus. Seth MacFarlane has a history with animal characters that goes as far back as his early shorts and pilots, like The Life of Larry or Larry and Steve. So we can be pretty confident in saying MacFarlane probably isn't trying to send us any kind of twisted messages through the talking animals in Family Guy. Well, no message other than, hey, that animal's just like a people! But this also got me thinking. Whether you think our main theory is true or not, what's the rationale behind including sentient animals in the shows at all? MacFarlane's shows are some of the most prominent ones of the last few years to have animals be indistinguishable in modern society from people. Since then, we've seen shows like BoJack Horseman and We Bare Bears take a similar approach. Both shows I highly recommend, by the way. These animals with human qualities, you may have noticed, are also ones that have either been domesticated or have adapted to our society. Most notably, the many dogs and pets that the Griffins have had in the past. You don't see nearly as many wild animals in these shows that possess the same human characteristics. Though it should be noted that you do sometimes, it's just not as much. As was said at the beginning of the video, MacFarlane has been from day one about taking common sitcom tropes and turning them on their heads. And taking something as innocent as the family pet and giving it all of the features and flaws of a human could have something to do with the fact that the role of pets has changed drastically over the last few decades. Until relatively recently, most domesticated animals were used as work animals. But since the dawn of the modern age, the role of pets, especially dogs, has evolved to be more of a companion. And I'm sure we all know one or two people who take this a step further and treat their cats or dogs like they're human children. And last time I checked, dogs are not human children. I don't know many toddlers who try to maul me when I walk in through the door, and furthermore, I don't think your German Shepherd likes people as much as you say she does, Eric. So anyway, it's not like the whole idea of animals being given the treatment of humans is some brand new idea. There's evidence that this is how many, if not most people, actually view their pets. This pattern of people associating human traits with animals or other things is known psychologically as anthropomorphism. And it's become so commonplace in our modern thinking that in 1996, 2 years before the debut of Family Guy, the American Animal Hospital Association conducted a survey and found that 75% of pet owners see their pets not as animals, but basically the same as children. So is it possible that the rationale behind all of these animal characters was to extend this belief beyond dogs and cats and to encompass every single species, highlighting its absurdity? But on the other hand, there's the possibility that they were inspired by old Warner Brothers or Disney or Hanna-Barbera cartoons, with characters like Sylvester and Tweety and Tom and Jerry still having human and animal tendencies, but also holding the label of pets about 99% of the time. It would make sense for this to be an inspiration since Seth MacFarlane did work for Hanna-Barbera before becoming a showrunner himself. When it comes to our CIA conspiracy, however, you can believe one of two things. Either A, the CIA sent Klaus to live with the Smiths undercover as just another talking animal in a universe naturally filled with them, or B, every single sentient animal we see in the MacFarlane-verse is the result of the same process Klaus went through. While this entire theory does hinge on one confirmed case of this experimentation, it seems a little difficult for me to accept that Tim the bear, Ernie the giant chicken, New Brian, Vinny, and all the other animals were the result of this twisted, meandering experiment. But that's just my opinion, as there does seem to be some pretty solid evidence for it, especially since we know it's a confirmed thing that happens in this universe anyway. To address the memory problem, maybe Klaus was some kind of pilot project that they tried before perfecting the memory wiping used with everybody else. So to rate the plausibility of all the animals in these shows being ex-humans, I'm gonna give it 3 unsold copies of Faster Than the Speed of Love out of 5. But what do you think? Do you think all of the talking animals in the MacFarlane-verse used to be human? Who do you think they used to be? Also, what's your all-time favorite episode of Family Guy? I have none, I guess. Might be Road to the Multiverse? The Brian and Stewie ones are great. Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments and let us know if you have any conspiracies you'd like us to take a look at in the future. Also be sure to like this video and subscribe to channel Frederator for more cartoon conspiracies.